He was the leader of the Khmer Rouge and conductor of the infamous Cambodian genocide. His mass atrocities were exposed to a worldwide audience via the 1984 film The Killing Fields. Tonight, on Unfolding the Facts, we talk with Pol Pot as he attempts to defend himself and as we attempt to understand how and why he committed such heinous crimes. We speak with Mr. Pol Pot at his home where he is on house arrest, serving a life sentence. Hello, Mr. Pol Pot.
Hello, sir.
May I call you by your birth name rather than your pseudonym?
My largest reasoning for using the name Pol Pot originally was to protect my family, but most of them are dead by now, and I understand that my birth name has become widely known, so you may call me by whichever name you wish.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Salazar, speaking of your family, where did you grow up?
Well, as you know, I grew up in Cambodia, but more specifically in the small village of Prek Sabu.
Based on your economic ideals as it relates to the Khmer Rouge, I'm interested to know, what was your family's financial situation like growing up?
Well, first I must say that it is all relative, and at the time that I was growing up, much of the nation of Cambodia was struggling financially, as they attempted to support both their French colonizers and themselves. With that being said, my family was relatively well off.
Fair enough, but your family did own 10 times the national average of rice paddy land. Anyhow, moving forward, it's difficult to see how your finances may have affected your future political ideals. Is there anything else from your childhood that may have done so?
Many of my researchers believe it has something to do with my Buddhist upbringing. You see, through Theravada Buddhism and stories from my youth about the positives of bad deeds and the negatives of good deeds, I grew up with this sort of realization that often our actions do not affect us, but rather our future lives. And also with the fact that he who is noble is often a fool.
I've heard you say in past interviews that you were an average or less than student. How then were you fit to become the leader and ruler of an entire nation?
In my eyes, I had already learned everything that I needed to learn in order to be a leader. I understood communist ideals, and I had the support of my fellow leaders in the Khmer Rouge. To be honest, I never even wanted to be the leader of the Khmer Rouge, but I was pushed by fellow leaders to take on the role, and so I did.
You say that you knew the communist ideals. Where did you learn of communism and its objectives?
Well, some of it was through natural learning, being out in the wilderness and meeting Buddhists who lived a lifestyle free from money and greed. But my formal learning came about when I was attending school in Paris. You see, I began learning about communism through my personal reading. And although I didn't understand much, as the books were written in French, I was inspired by the idea of communism, and so I continued to read. From there, I just started joining communist groups, and I just continued to get more and more invested and learn more and more.
So, starting from a college student, reading French books on communism, how on earth did you end up as the leader of one of the most infamous communist regimes in history?
Well, after I moved back to Cambodia, I became a teacher, much like Mao, and I joined a proto-communist group known as the Khmer People's Revolutionary Party, as you now know it, the Khmer Rouge, committed to a rebellion to take over Cambodia. I began rising through the ranks, and eventually in '68, I became party chief.
And that's when you launched the uprising. How did that go?
Yes. Well, you see, at first it was difficult. We couldn't really get our foot in the door. Finally, we started to gain more and more support in the Northeast, probably because of its lack of population. But anyways, from there, we just kept hitting roadblocks. Or at least they seemed like roadblocks at the time. Ultimately, they were probably what saved us.
What do you mean?
Well, you see, at first, General Lon Nol initiated a coup within the military. Now, this would seemingly be a major loss, because it would weaken our possibility of taking over. But the prince was so upset by this attack that he decided to join forces with us. So in the end, it actually made us stronger. Then, boom, U.S. joins forces with Lon Nol because of their quote-unquote anti-communist stance. However, this turned out to be another victory for us, because in addition to bombing Vietnam during the war there, they bombed Cambodia. A lot. Anyways, long story short, the people were fed up, and they supported the Khmer Rouge, leading to our victory in 75.
So then you established Cambodia under your regime, which you call Democratic Kampuchea.
That's correct.
We're going to take a short break. When we come back, what Salah Tsar did with his newfound power.
If you're watching this and you support communism, but more importantly, if you don't, go buy Mao's Little Red Book. Mao's Little Red Book is filled with inspiring quotations from Mao Zedong himself, the accomplished communist leader. For only $15, you can own this book. Learn about communism and how great it really is, so that we can join together and create one communist nation ruling over the entire world. If you buy this in the next 10 minutes, you'll also get a free propaganda poster that you can hang up outside your window or in your room and tell all your friends about how great communism is. Call 930-35-COMMIE to get your Mao's Little Red Book today. Once again, that's 930-35-COMMIE. Mao's not liable for any brainwashing effect that his book may have. Read at your own risk. Go buy Mao's Little Red Book today.
And we're back. So, after Democratic Kampuchea was established, what kind of laws did you put in place?
I simply outlawed all the evils of the world. Money, private property, jewelry, gambling, and of course, religion. I also had to make laws to ensure that there were no disruptions when it came to collective farming. Then, obviously, I had to place strict rules on other things that could become evils, like sexual intercourse, vocabulary, and clothing.
And you forced children into the military, correct?
It is sad, but it was necessary in order to protect us from the evil Vietnamese.
That brings me to my next point. So, you often attacked intellectuals, those who lived in cities, civil servants, religious leaders, and Vietnamese living in Cambodia. Now, many of these make sense because, as history tells us, the intellectuals are the ones most likely to rebel against an unjust government. The people in the cities didn't fit your model of agrarian society. Civil servants supported the old regime, and of course, religious leaders opposed your ideas of atheism and the absence of religion in order to create equality. But why would you be so inclined to kill or send away or hurt Vietnamese who lived in your nation?
As I said, the Vietnamese are evil. They are part of the same group who later planned to start a coup and try to remove me as their leader. Now, there's nothing wrong with the Viet Cong, but the others, the ones who were in our country because they opposed communism, they were obvious troublemakers. They fled one communist regime, and since we were building a new, and even greater one, in our nation, Democratic Kampuchea, they were a massive threat to our success.
According to Death of a Nation, the Khmer Rouge, at one point, a young girl of only 12 years ran an entire region of the nation. How do you justify this?
It is very simple. These positions were based on loyalty, nothing else. Now, if I were to give out these jobs based on people's skills, that would be wrong. It would mean that there is not true equality within my nation. This young woman loved our nation, and she fought for it. That's all that matters.
In a past interview, you claimed that the atrocities were committed by people who you didn't know, lower level people, and that you were only in contact with the higher ranking members in your regime. However, one of the highest ranking members in your regime, a former detention center overseer named Kang Kek-yu, he became leader of the Santabel, or secret police who ran all of the detention centers. So you would know him very well. He admitted to being involved in the torture and execution of people, including babies. So how were these atrocities occurring right under your nose without you knowing? Because obviously you knew some people who were involved.
Maybe he lied to me. Maybe he was working with the Vietnamese. I don't know. I want to reiterate, though, that I had nothing to do with this. Sure, I reprimanded people for attempting treason, but I never did anything that was not totally justified. Look at me. And those of you viewing, I bid you do the same. Do I look like I would kill a baby? Do I look like an evil person to you?
No, you don't. But as my mother always said, no, you don't. But as my mother always said, never judge a book by its cover. With that being said, I'll leave it up to you, the viewers, to decide whether or not Pol Pot or Salazar is as innocent as he says or as guilty as the court says. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next week.